Phil, here we are right next to Wallace Warfield's home practically, and you've erected this wonderful museum in her honor. But what frustrates you about most Baltimoreans and people in general who know or don't know about the Duchess of Windsor?
They don't have a clue. King Edward VIII gave up the throne to marry this woman. It was amazing that it was huge news then. It was an enormous news. It was in the papers all the time. Afterwards, they were constantly in the papers. She was the best dressed woman in the world. They were fashion icons. They went everywhere. They knew all the famous people in the world. They led fascinating lives. But yet, people in Baltimore don't have any clue who she was. They just don't know. It's just amazing.
Alexandra, other than making the King of England give up his throne for her, what was Wallis, the Duchess of Windsor, also known for?
Well, she was certainly known as a fashion icon of the 20th century, and I think it was justified. She had a very specific style. She patronized some of the top designers of the day. This example is known as the monkey dress, and this was a dress that she probably wore once. It was designed by Givenchy just for her, and it's made of a silk organza, and then embroidered, all hand embroidered with a monkey band. So each of the monkeys is playing a different instrument, and this is a play on the German porcelain monkey bands, which I suspect that she had seen, either owned by the Duke or in one of the houses she was in, and custom made for her. There is no other monkey dress. It came to us through one of her friends and relatives outside of Baltimore and delivered right to the museum. So we also have a wonderful photograph of her wearing it done by a Baltimore photographer. So there's a great Baltimore connection to this dress as well.
How do you feel about the fact that most people in this neighborhood, let alone the city, most people don't even know who she was?
Well, they don't even know who she was or even where she lived. But then again, I hear stories that she lived everywhere, all over the place. That's just not true. There were very specific places where she lived. And 212 Biddle was one of those places, which is 3 doors away. The only reason we had this museum was to enhance the house to raise money for charity. And I would say most of the people on this street, with the exception of a couple of renters that I don't know, they know. They know where she lived and they know all about her.
Well, it sounds like he also gave up his fortune for her as well with all these beautiful designer dresses.
I think he was very supportive of her fashionista tendencies because he himself had a great interest in costume. And I think they probably made an effort to coordinate some of their attire when they had public appearances, because you can see that in the photos. And he paid just as much attention to his clothing as she paid to hers. In fact, in the collection we have designs by Christian Dior where they would be done uniquely for her, and this is the height of couture where she would get various swatches and she could decide exactly how she wanted the dresses made. So it must have been really lovely to wear only couture clothing for your entire life.
I feel so shabby here.
Well, she was really petite. I
Yes.
mean, look at this waist size. What is this, like 20-some inches?
This is about 25 inches, so much smaller than the average woman today. She was a very religious dieter.
That's how he could afford these dresses. Low grocery bill.
And would she have worn this at a cocktail party or entertaining or?
Probably a somewhat formal event. I mean, this is a fairly formal gown, and she wore it with an enormous pile of aquamarines around her neck. So it was quite formal. This dress by Christian Dior is much more typical of what she would have worn just in her everyday about town clothing, and yet still made just for her. Down to every detail, and something that we were able to acquire that shows more of what she wore every day as opposed to what she would wear for special occasions.
And how did the museum get these pieces?
This was delivered by a friend and someone distant relation to us, delivered to us in the 60s. But the other parts of the collection were donated to us through a foundation when the Sotheby's sale happened. And because of Willis Simpson's connection to Baltimore, they felt it was important that we be able to represent her story, and her clothing is a great way to represent certainly her story after she married the Duke.
all the publicity lately with the King's speech, the royal wedding, all of this has brought her back to light. She did get a lot of attention when, after she died, when her jewelry brought in like $50 million at Geneva Sotheby's. And then last fall in Sotheby's London, whoever bought jewelry at that auction 25 years ago, that stuff brought in a record amount of money. Just one piece of her, the Panther diamond and onyx bracelet has been so copied in everything, all kinds of jewelry. It brought over $7 million.